Bring in our international affairs editor, Philip Turle, now for more on this meeting and for the context to this encounter. The big topic here, obviously, is the kinds of security guarantees that Europe can actually offer to Ukraine.
Yeah, I think that is probably one of the key points of discussion that's going to be taking place today between Volodymyr Zelensky and Emmanuel Macron. Remember that Britain and France are the two countries that have spearheaded this coalition that are willing to take over Ukraine once the conflict is over, at least after a peace deal is signed with the Russians. There are about 30 countries or so on board with this around Europe, even as far away as Canada. But it's only really Britain and France that have so far said they're willing to deploy troops on the ground in Ukraine after a peace deal is signed. Now, that is going to come down pretty badly with the Russians because they don't want any troops from NATO countries deployed on the ground. So there is a big question about what kind of security guarantees that the West can actually give to Ukraine once a peace deal is signed. I think also the other questions on the agenda here are going to be the supply of missiles, defense systems to Ukraine from Europe. There is this feeling that the United States has been blowing hot and cold perpetually over the last few months on their support or not support for Ukraine, and Europe has to take over and be present to give Ukraine all the backing that it needs. And I think there'll be another item on the agenda which will certainly be discussed between Presidents Zelensky and Macron, and that is the use of frozen Russian assets in Europe to pay for the future building of a defense system in Ukraine and possibly to buy defense systems, missiles for Ukraine if the war continues. So I think that is what basically will be happening here in Paris today. This is the 10th visit by Volodymyr Zelensky. As we were just hearing from Catherine Norris-Trent, there is a very fine and close collaboration between France and Ukraine over what position to take, how Europe sees Ukraine, the position of Europe as a backer for Ukraine. And I think many in Europe feel, well, okay, we've got the United States on one side. We don't really know whether they're going to continue supporting Ukraine or shift more in favor of Russia. We are much closer to Ukraine in Europe than the Americans are, and we have more to lose if Russia is to take more control of Ukraine. That's why we need to be present and show that we are a force to be reckoned with.
We've seen, amid this renewed push of discussions over this peace deal, we've seen the Ukrainians and the Americans talk in Florida over the weekend. We're seeing the Ukrainians and the Europeans talk this Monday in Paris. And on Tuesday, we're expecting Steve Witkoff's, to Donald Trump's envoy, to go to Moscow and to bring that plan to Russia. What's the likelihood of Putin going along with this plan?
I would say that the likelihood of Putin going along with it is practically zero. And that's the big problem, because we have these flurry of talks going on. We have Donald Trump saying, yeah, we're making big progress, we're moving towards some kind of deal. Well, that is all banter for the time being, because up until now, the only deal that Russia was willing to accept, and not all of the points in that deal, was the original deal that the United States put forward that was totally rejected by Ukraine as being too much in favor of Russia. The advances made last week between the Europeans and the Ukrainians were rejected by the Russians, and it looks almost certain that the peace discussion that took place yesterday in Florida, when Steve Witkoff goes to meet the Russian president tomorrow, will almost certainly be rejected by Russia. The problem here, Charles, is that Russia still believes that it has more to gain on the ground than coming to the negotiating table, and it wants to carry on with the war because it feels that the United States may eventually come on board with the Russians, and that is what they want, because Donald Trump has been blowing hot and cold, and Vladimir Putin knows that he can more or less wrap Donald Trump around his little finger when he needs to. And that is the game that they're playing right now. So it's very difficult to see how the Americans are going to be able to push this unless they really turn down hard on Vladimir Putin and say, this is take it or leave it. Otherwise, there are going to be increased sanctions, and your life is going to be much more difficult afterwards. Are the Americans willing to do that for the moment? Well, they've done some sanctions, but maybe not enough in the eyes of many of those who are supporting Ukraine. But as far as this peace deal is concerned, I think it's pretty certain that Vladimir Putin is going to say no.